Hello and welcome to another episode of Spiritually
Spiritually
Incorrect.
incorrect. Do you want to? Did you like that? I think we should say spiritually incorrect together. Do you like it?
No.
It's like it's like when they're singing and like Mariah Carey's singing, but then her backup singers like singing with her. Like, you know what I mean? Here, let's do it
I
again.
got asked recently, it's like, do you guys like plan or prep like what you guys are going to talk about? No, this is all improv. This is 100% improv. I had no idea you were going to interrupt me. Now people don't even know who we are. I didn't even get to say who our names are.
You know what names are? What?
I'm your host, Seth Hart. Joined with me
I'm
is
joining
Jonathan
Jonathan
Lyonhart.
Lyonhart. See,
I'm your host, Seth Hart.
Sync.
Joined with me is the world's biggest idiot.
Oh, you like you could even know that.
I took
So,
a systematic poll, a Barna study poll, a Pew Research poll.
how are you doing, man? It's been we're both tired. It's nearing the end of semester. I feel so dead. Like, go ahead. Sorry. No, you go ahead.
So I actually have a head cold right now. So I might actually like have to mute myself because I've moved. I actually led a trip this past Tuesday to Thursday for a group of students. We went down to a conference called Mosaics, which is it's a conference in Dallas where they just kind of talk. It's once every 3 years where they talk about how to create a multicultural church. Great trip, but I woke up. Left Thursday, left Tuesday, got there Tuesday night, woke up Wednesday with the worst headache, foggiest head, and just feeling so freaking sick. And I'm like, I'm trapped. I've got 30 students here that I have to take care of, and I feel like junk. And so I'm still in recovery mode from that. Luckily, everything else went well, other than my, the near apocalypse for me. Everything else went well, though. So, yes, tired is a good word.
It's the audience doesn't know, but Seth and I talked right as that trip was ending, and he was so grumpy. He's saying he wasn't, but he totally was. I could tell he was so tired, and he's mad at me for bringing it up on here. I can tell.
So I was grumpy. Yeah, don't lie. I was grumpy. You thought I was grumpy at you, and I'm like, no, John.
I make everything about myself, Seth. How do you not know this? Because I'm so egotistically driven, I make everything about myself, which makes me very insecure because then every slight is inadvertently about me. It's a vicious cycle, Seth.
It is, and I completely ignored that by the fact that this is the first time I think many of our users, or people who view us on YouTube, can see the nice little hammock that you have in your office.
First of all, the hammock is lovely. Thank you for acknowledging that for our video users. But also, what's with the term users? Not listeners. You said users, almost like we're a drug. I'm a fan of calling our listeners users. Yeah,
I am too.
They are officially our users. Yeah, and it starts good, but then it starts to spiral and go downhill, and then you can't do anything except listen to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast, and then your life's over, and you can't get off the couch.
It gets worse and worse and worse, sort of like the evil God hypothesis.
This was worst transition ever, man.
No, that's not even top 10.
No. Well, what are we talking about today, Seth? I mean, you did it. You transitioned
This was your
us.
idea. You got to introduce this.
Okay. Well, it was my idea, but it's loosely inspired based on Seth's life. The idea is to ask, what if God is evil? Not just in the sense of like, oh, why is there so much suffering? How could he allow that? Because that tends to be, how could a good God allow so much evil? But rather, what if God actually just is evil? What if at the heart of all of existence is not a good, benevolent will, but is an evil, cruel dictator? And because a lot of the arguments for the existence of God, a lot of that stuff might suggest there is a creator, but it doesn't actually suggest whether that creator is good or bad. What if the creator is bad? What if evil is absolute?
But John, isn't this just a ridiculous hypothesis? Because if God was evil, why aren't we all just living in an eternal hell right now?
What a good question, Seth, and I'm glad you asked it. Go ahead.
It's one of many different immediate thoughts that people will have whenever they hear something like this. But believe it or not, this is actually a very interesting point of discussion within philosophy. Because the answer to that, like why, like it might seem, oh, it's clearly not the case because we're not living in hell. Well, we believe in a good God, but we're not all living in heaven.
Yeah.
So any explanation you give for why a good God can allow us not to be in heaven, you might also give a good explanation for why a bad God might not have us in hell right now.
Yep, it's just like God might allow a little bit of joy in order to make your suffering all the more pregnant with loss and hopelessness. It's sort of like in the third Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, where the prison that Bane puts Christian Bale in is down at the bottom of the pit, and you can look up out and you can see the exit, right? Like there's no roof. If you could climb it, you could escape. Why did they allow you to look out? To give you hope, because the hope makes your imprisonment all the much worse, because then you're holding on to it. You're holding on that I might get out of here, and you don't just give up and surrender. You keep going, and that well, he does, but he wasn't supposed to. The point is, a little bit of light makes the dark all the worse. And so that hope that maybe this evil God allows a little bit of beauty in our world, you know, the smile of a baby, the beauty of the scenery, all of these things, only to make our suffering all the worse when those things are torn away. You know what I mean?
I love that you went with The Dark Knight Rises rather than The Good Place.
Oh yeah, no, this is the bad place, right? Yeah.
Right. Where they figure it out, where it's like, oh, this is the bad place, where they think they're in heaven, they think they're in the good place. But as like things go on, they like slowly like things like they're like, oh wait, no, like they like some certain things start to sort of pop up to where it's like, this isn't quite as good as I thought it was. And eventually it just starts roller coastering until it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, until finally they're like, oh, this is the bad place. Clearly it is. And they out and out reveal that they're in the bad place.
Yeah. Well,
spoiler, sorry if you haven't seen that series already. That's just season 1 though. So it's not that's not a big deal, right?
Well, and even before that show came out, I remember a lot of people talking about hell, not as constant punishment, but what if it's just a place where you get whatever you want? And so people build mansions, you know, they get all this stuff, they get milkshakes 24/7, they drive cars, and then slowly the diminishing returns, they start to get bored, it starts to fall through, and they realize that what they thought was paradise was actually hollow and empty, and this is hell, right? Like
that's the Great Divorce.
Well, I mean, I think, is it the Great Divorce? I mean, I guess they kind of get everything. I mean, I guess the most of the Great Divorce doesn't occur in hell; it occurs in heaven. So in the transition,
yeah, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, that book where it starts out in hell, and in hell, people can just point and have whatever they want. Yeah, and so the problem is like, you know, it's like, I want my mansion here, and someone else goes, it's like, no, I want a mansion there, and they see your mansion, they're like, well, I need to have a bigger one, and so they point and get a bigger one, and then someone else makes it, and so it ends up that they all start hating each other and like moving further away, and you end up just hating people, and you all like end up isolating yourself, so you can have every material possession you want, but you end up miserable because of it.
Yeah.
Because of your ceaseless desire for more and more and more and more, and the more you actually get, the less satisfaction you get from it. So it ends up just, that's his description of hell.
So then, I mean, just applying the logic, what if all of the maneuvers we take to justify God allowing evil, what if all of the ways that we've explained hell, you know, all these types of things, what then, returning to our question, what if God allows a little bit of good and joy to enter in, just to make all of our suffering a little bit more? And is there any real difference between an all good God and an all evil God? If both of them are allowing good or allowing evil for some greater means to an end? Is there actually a conceptual difference between a good God who allows a bit of evil to bring about the good, and a bad God who allows a little good to bring about the bad?
Yeah. And it's, so here's the thing, and we know just from experience that quite often something can start out really, really good, only to end up horrible, evil, and terrible at the end, and not worth the time. Kind of like the Marvel movies.
No, don't do that. Don't jump on the bandwagon of booing. Yeah, okay, the latest phase isn't the best, but it also brought me Deadpool versus Wolverine, a Spider-Man reunion with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield.
That was years ago.
No, but that's still this phase, and I refuse to just pretend. Okay, whatever. I don't even want to talk to you. So
I think you call me. You say I'm jumping on the bandwagon, man. I am the bandwagon. I've been saying this since Endgame. After Endgame, I said I don't think this is going to be good anymore. I've been saying this. I've been the apostle of the downfall of Marvel for years, man.
Okay, I don't even want to talk to you about this because it'll just upset me. So let's
okay. All right. So there's two major points. Like there's two major arguments that I can see for the evil God hypothesis. Number one is the existence of Jonathan. No, sorry. That's point number 3. Number one is the fact that most arguments for the existence of God are actually morally neutral. So let's just think about it, right? like the idea that we live in a simulation, like the simulation hypothesis. A lot of people use that to explain, like all the things people use to explain God. Why does there seem to be a beginning to the universe? What does it seem fine-tuned for life? All this stuff that people who support the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in a giant simulation, seems to be consistent, seems to draw from the same arguments that theists draw from, those who believe in God. They use it to explain, it's not God who created all of this, it's whoever jump-started the computer of the simulation that we're in. Well, I think I'm going to use that to point out that if the simulation hypothesis is true, we don't know the motives of the simulators.
Yeah.
Could be good. So could be bad.
This isn't even necessarily an evil God, just an evil creator. Like, we could be an evil teenage kid's game, right? Like,
with super advanced technology to simulate us, right?
Yeah.
How do we know? If if we take the argument that, for God's existence, like what we talked about in our one episode where we did the arguments for God's existence, the Kalam cosmological argument, the teleological argument, none of that tells us the character of God.
Does the moral argument suggest the character of God?
The moral argument might be the exception, right?
Well, is it though? Because do you want to recap the moral argument for our audience? You'll do it quicker than I will, because I'll get too excited about it and talk for 10 minutes.
Basically it's the idea that independent of what any culture, anyone's idea of what is right and wrong, there is somewhere out there a code written into the very fabric of the universe that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. It's not just everyone's opinion of what's right and wrong. No, some things really are just wrong. Well, what makes that the case? What makes it the fact that, murdering for fun is objectively wrong and loving and caring for those in need is objectively right? Well, if it's not just our consensus, the fact that most people agree with it, if it's not just an opinion, there's got to be something out there in the universe that grounds these facts, that allows us to live in a universe where that's true and not just, it's not just like a dog eat dog. It's not like with animals, where animals don't have moral values. Humans are different. We do have moral values. And so the best explanation for that is it's often an appeal to that these moral laws are grounded in either the will of God or the character of God. God seems to be a place to basically say, the reason that certain things are right and wrong, the reason why there are certain things that are right and wrong is because there's a God who makes it that way. There's a God who gives us moral laws. It's grounded in either his will or his character. And so that's the idea of the moral argument, is we know that there are that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. Those aren't physical facts about the universe, that murder is wrong. That's not a physical fact I can go out and point to. It's a non-physical thing. And the best way to explain that is a God who makes it the case. And the reason I say that might be the exception is the fact that normally, if you want to say it's grounded in the character of God, God himself is loving. Why is love good? Because God himself is loving, and he wants that for his creation. So you're grounding moral facts in the character of God. So if the moral argument goes through, that does then provide some level of justification for believing that God is good.
Well, couldn't it just be the opposite, though, that God is evil itself, and so creation deviates from that, just as God's, just on the traditional case, creation deviates away from God's goodness. So too, why couldn't the moral, why can't we say, yes, morality is real, good and evil are real things, but it's inverted. Evil really is real, and there is a moral compass. It's just you have it upside down, and God is actually the evil side of it rather than the good side of it.
Yeah, and the reason that you can't do that is because when we say that certain things are good, we're saying you ought to do them. In the evil God hypothesis, if you were to say that morality is grounded in the evilness of God and not in the goodness of God, what you would then be saying is that the evil is actually what you ought to be doing. But we're not saying that. So it puts the cart before the horse in that way. Because if these moral facts are true, they would be opposite of what the evil God would expect. Unless the evil God has an ulterior motive, which would be a way of explaining, going around this. But it would also be to say that these aren't really objective moral values. They're lies given to us by this evil God to make us think that that certain things really are really, really good, right?
But I imagine someone who takes this position might retort that, okay, but you're not rethinking your moral categories fundamentally enough, Seth, because if the absolute at the heart of all existence is evil itself, then yeah, we ought to want to do evil. And so maybe we should ought to do evil. Maybe the agents of chaos and cruelty are the real honest open ones, and everyone else who's trying to bring about the light and the good it's just a facade.
Yeah. And what you would end
you
up
know,
doing there is undermining the foundation for believing in objective moral values to begin with. Because the main justification for thinking there are real moral laws out there is that there is some universality to them. There's some general agreement that we should treat each other with some level of dignity and respect. Now, again, the details will differ from culture to culture, and yet generally that is a true statement that transcends most cultures. So that's what needs to be explained, is this moral sense that we have. So if you're going to say, well, actually, those are completely deceived, well, you can say that. And honestly, I think someone who wants to hold to the evil God hypothesis can say that. But yet what you're saying is the moral argument doesn't work. So what I'm saying is if the moral argument does work, it does undermine the evil God hypothesis. But it does, like, the justification for one of the premises that there are objective moral values is the fact that of our moral sense, of a sort of common general moral sense among most people.
Okay, so perhaps it's conceptually plausible to imagine an evil God who is evilness itself, and we ought to do evil. However, that contradicts our sort of experiential sense of right and wrong and morality, which is really what gives the argument its oomph. That there's an experiential, almost empirical sense of, yeah, morality is real. It's as real as the table in front of me. Like, do not murder. And sure, we can say that those instincts are upside down, but then you've forfeited the weight, the power, the persuasiveness of the argument, because most people don't have that experience. Most people don't sense that evil is good.
Yeah.
Most people sense that good is good. And so if that's wrong, conceptually that's consistent with an evil God and a moral framework, but it takes away all of the oomph and power of the moral argument that would lead you to assume such a God, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so what you would want to do if you believe in the evil God hypothesis is basically say, well, there's good reasons to believe that an evil God would want us to falsely believe this. And that actually gets to the second reason someone might believe in this. Number one is most theistic arguments are compatible with an evil God. Number two is the fact that and this is the big one. This is where a lot of the conversations come in. How Christians normally justify God's allowing of evil in the world works both ways. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is there's a thing out there called skeptical theism. And what skeptical theism says is that we are in no place as finite creatures here on earth, where our perspective is so limited, to be able to look at all the evil in the world and say, God is unjust for allowing that. Sort of the Job perspective, where Job basically says, God shouldn't have done all this to me. God basically comes down and says, who are you, that you should do all of this? Who are you that you should, indict me whenever I'm the one who created the universe? You can't understand all this other natural processes. How can you expect to understand how I rule the justice of the universe? So basically, Job basically says, you're right, I can't understand this. I've spoken about things that I don't understand. And that's been a common point for many theists to say, we're just not in a perspective to say if a good God has good reasons or not for allowing evil in the world. We're just in too much of a finite, restricted viewpoint to make those sorts of moral judgments. And it seems to make a lot of sense. Skeptical theism is very popular. We're not in a good position. We don't know from a sort of cosmic God's eye view if God can use all the evil, even the most horrendous things, for some level of good. Now here's where the problem comes in. Let's flip that around. If we can say that a good God could, in theory, allow for evil to happen, a lot of evil, the Holocaust, starvation, genocides, right? Could not it also be the case that there is an evil God out there who allows all the good in the world, and that we're not in a position to basically rule that out? Could it not be the case that there is an evil God out there who allows all these sorts of good things in our lives for some unknown ultimate evil purpose? Well, if it works in the one case, couldn't it work in the other?
I think what's really being said is there anything that's asymmetrical between good and evil, an absolute good and an absolute evil, such that one of them has to be deeper or more real than the other? Or is it totally symmetrical, such that anything you would say to point to a good God could just as well be said to point to a bad God? And I think the moral argument was interesting. That does seem to point more to a good God at the heart of all things, because you'd have to negate basically our moral senses of the world to say that actually. Wouldn't an evil
God want us to have a false sense of morality?
Well, that's what makes it hard. What if all of even our conversations here, what if they're based on false reasoning because this evil God has given us false thinking and false brains? And this is where René Descartes actually really got stuck, because he kind of said, we can doubt everything about the world. What if God is evil, or what if there's a demon who's trying to trick me? And so all of these sense experiences that I'm encountering are deceptions. And this is actually his argument for the existence of God. Only if there is a good source of all things should we trust that which has been given to give us true knowledge. Because if reality, or the thing at the heart of all reality, is neutral or evil, then why would we expect and trust our faculties, our ability to make sense of the world? Why would we trust our own brains? Unless there is one who is good and so has designed us with good faculties that we can trust because they are good and wouldn't deceive us, why can we trust any of our thinking at all?
And that's also where he invokes a version of the ontological argument, where he basically says, how do I know God exists? Well, and if you can go back and listen to where our episode on ranking the arguments for God's existence, where we talk about the ontological argument, it's pretty complex. But long story short, it's the argument that says the very idea of God. You can't even have an idea of God without, in some sense, necessitating that there is a God. So the very fact that Descartes, thinking through his ideas of perfections and stuff like that, says that's got to come from somewhere, and it can't come from me. So it must come from the divine. So he thought of that as a sort of rational proof that there is an all-good being out there, that God could not possibly not exist. And the thing is there's two lines of reasoning here. One is to say, yes, if you hold to the ontological argument, goodbye evil God hypothesis, because the ontological argument proves the existence of a maximally great being, an all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing, all-good being, which we would call God, right? But I know where you're going, John, because you're about to speak up. You could say, how do we know we're not deceived by this evil God? How do we not know that this evil God is not perverting our brains, our minds, to think that a maximally good being would be one that's all good, and part of his or her or whatever its evil plan to pervert our understandings? And this is where Descartes, what he would say, I'm going to play Descartes here. Descartes, by the way, for those who don't know, is a 17th century philosopher, sort of the founder of modern thought. What he would say is, okay, what good reasons do we have for believing that? What good reason could you give for denying reason? Even in theory, you couldn't. Even in theory, you can't give a reason for denying reason, because then it would be self-defeating. And so what he would say is that, sure, maybe in some bare possibility, you could entertain it, but you could never evidence it.
Yeah. So we might not be able to prove that reason works, but any attempt to disprove it uses reason for the disproof.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're going to get started, we have to assume reason is good.
Right.
And we have to assume that in some way, reason is somehow good and trustworthy. And so the nature of what is true and good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's one possible response. I don't think most people who hold to the evil God hypothesis are going to be convinced by that.
Yeah, because again, you could just double down and say, but even that, maybe you could be deceived.
Sure.
And maybe Descartes' doubt just wasn't radical enough. He should have questioned deeper.
Yeah, maybe you could say reason mostly works.
Until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. Or you just say, yeah, but there is this one thing that's perverted, which is our idea of perfection. And not everyone across all cultures has agreed on what something perfect would be. So it's not as if this is some universal aspect of human reason that we all understand perfection in the same way, which is foundational to the ontological argument. And so, but that's a premise that you need to have it work. So it's not a flawless argument. Long story short, it's not a flawless argument. We're not out of the woods yet. We can't just throw out the ontological argument and say, there, we're done with the evil God hypothesis. Let's wash our hands clean.
We're using the evil God thing to say maybe you can't trust reason. But what if the evil God has given us accurate intellectual and sensory faculties precisely so that we can follow our reason in order to see accurately the hopelessness of our world and lead to more suffering? I mean, it's almost a cliche to say that the more knowledge you have, the more depressed you are. I think there's even a text in scripture in Ecclesiastes that says the more knowledge, the more meaningless it all is, because the more you study these things and see them accurately, I definitely feel sad. Like I miss when I was younger and didn't know as much and kind of felt a bit more naively blissful. I don't the more I know, the more depressed I feel about the world. You know what I mean? So what if the evil God has allowed us to accurately perceive the crappiness of existence precisely to increase our suffering?
Yeah, and another thing you could possibly say is, let's go back to the simulation hypothesis. Maybe there is an all-good, the ontological argument really does prove an all-good God out there. But maybe that's not the one who created our universe. Maybe there is an all-good God out there, but some malevolent child with sophisticated technology created our simulation in which we're all in, right? So you could fit the ontological argument into the evil God hypothesis, where you say, yeah, there is an all-good God out there. He just isn't the one who directly made us.
Our father is Satan, and yet his father is God. I love it. There's so many possibilities. But even in that universe, you still... Because, I mean, even if my kids have a bad father, which I don't think they do, but, even if they have me as a bad parent... even if you have a bad parent, you can still exist within a broader universe where there is an ultimate, absolute good parent.
Yeah.
So I don't know...
exactly. That's my point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not out of the woods yet. You're not.
So I was saying that the question is, are good and evil symmetrical such that any argument for one naturally leads to the other, or is there some sort of asymmetricality to it such that good has to be more real and absolute and evil
maybe
less
define
real?
What you mean by asymmetricality.
So everything that you could say of good, you could also say on the other side for bad, such that any argument for good is also going to be perfectly mirrored on the other side for a bad God. But asymmetrical might have... No, it's not exactly the same. You can have one that's higher than the other, and the other one is genuinely lower. They're not equal. They're not perfectly balanced.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, one of the arguments I can think of is the idea that evil isn't something in itself, but rather the absence of light, the absence of the good, in the same way that darkness isn't anything in itself, but the absence of light, right? This is often called the privation theory of evil, that evil isn't something. It doesn't participate in being. It's not a thing. It's a lack of a thing or a gap or a crack in reality. And this might be used to argue that goodness is more fundamentally real because it's all that is. Being itself is good. And so that would be a type of argument to say that good is more real and more fundamental than evil at the heart of all things.
Yeah, and so let's actually work this out a little bit, because this is something that, if you know your church history, you know that this gets into some of the conversations the early church was having. In Zoroastrianism is a monotheistic faith that way back before Christianity in the Persian Empire, there was a prophet named Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, depending on who you ask. And he developed this theology. And long story short, there's an ultimate god called Ahura Mazda, an all-good god. On the flip side, there's an all-bad god. And I can't remember the all-bad god's name. But nevertheless, there is a all-good god and an all-bad god. And that filtered into some later theologies that the church had to deal with. And that's been actually kind of a prevalent idea, even to the point that I have to talk down some Christians from believing in this. And, it pops up in Manichaeanism, and sometimes people are called Manichaeans if they believe in this idea of that there's an all good God and an all bad God. And some Christians will believe this in the fact that they think that Satan is all evil, that he is God's opposite. But
or more practically, sorry, go ahead.
More practically what?
Or more practically, Christians will often say God has to use suffering to bring about growth or goodness. And it's like, wait, does that make darkness necessary for light? Like maybe God can use darkness or pain, but if he has to, if you have to suffer in order to appreciate the good things, does that make good dependent on bad and them almost equal? And I think a lot of Christians buy into that sort of logic on a practical level, where they make evil necessary to spiritual growth. Not something God uses instrumentally, but almost like, no, you cannot see the good unless you've seen the bad. You cannot appreciate the light unless you've ventured into the dark. They almost make the two equal and necessary to each other.
What makes that so much better is you kept like moving your head to the side, and Sauron would just pop out when you were like, the evil is necessary for the light, and Sauron would just pop up behind your head.
My Sauron statue on the wall. Yeah, I've got a bunch of Lord of the Rings stuff on the wall. He's watching. But I mean, I love that you cook it there, because Tolkien basically believed what we're saying, that evil wasn't anything in itself. Which is why Sauron in the series doesn't start as evil. He starts as good. He's made good. And evil is always a perversion of goodness, because goodness is the only thing that's real. And so evil can't be anything in its own right. It can only pervert the goodness that's already there and twist good things to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and here's the funny thing. If you look at the evil God hypothesis, what many early Christians pointed out when they were dealing with this idea that maybe there's an all-powerful God and an all-evil God, what they pointed out is the idea of an evil God might be incoherent. In this sense, C.S. Lewis, not just Tolkien, but C.S. Lewis picks up on this, and he basically repeats the argument in Mere Christianity. When you say, there's this evil God who desires, who gets pleasure, who wants to do evil for us, what you're thinking is that he's getting some sort of pleasure out of this. He's getting some sort of pleasure out of this. Pleasure's a good thing. Pleasure is a good thing. If you're going to have a coherent picture of this supposedly evil God, and if he's truly all evil, what you would want to say is that he gets bad feelings. He suffers because he causes us to suffer, and then he desires more suffering upon himself or itself, right? By causing us more suffering, because then it's nothing but evil. It's just suffering all around. There's no pleasure. There's no goodness in it at all. That's not normally how it was portrayed. It's usually portrayed as this evil God is malevolent and gets some sort of happiness or thrill out of this torturing of humanity, or this evil plans that it has for humanity. And that's
so you can't even. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just the idea that this evil God isn't truly all evil, because he has good things about him. He has pleasure. He has excitement. He has joy. Those are good things. So he's not really truly all evil. He's a mix of evil and good. So the idea of an all-evil God, a God that actually gets displeasure out of causing us suffering, no one actually believes that's a coherent idea. It doesn't even make a lot of sense for such a being to exist. And that's an easy early argument against certain concepts of the evil God hypothesis.
Yeah, so in order to even articulate the evil God, you end up enlisting truth, beauty, goodness, bliss, those types of things. I think that makes a lot of sense. But is the opposite true, Seth? Can the evil person, can the proponent of an evil God not say that we always have to bring light, we always have to bring darkness and evil into things when we talk about God? Because I mean, how else can we make sense of this evil world unless God in some way had to lead to that?
Yeah, and this is where you get into things.
Is the reverse true, basically?
Yeah, no, and this is where you get into some things is where people begin to measure, is the world more evil or good? And
no, I mean at the conceptual level, we have to use good, true, beautiful to talk about an evil God. Is the reverse true, where to talk about a good God, you have to enlist evil at some point? Or is there an asymmetricality, to use that word again, such that you can talk about a good God without talking about evil, but you can't talk about evil without goodness. So goodness must be more primary, more real, more absolute, more at the heart of all things.
I think those are separate questions, right? Which one is more fundamental, right? Like, do you understand straightness by the crooked or the crooked by the straight? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
Well, I
see what
guess
I'm
that's
saying?
the question. You were arguing that evil can't exist on its own. It already has to bring the true and the good. Like, is there any reverse argument to say, what if goodness is a privation and evil's the thing that's real?
No, not really, right? Especially when you think about the desires, the desire concept that we're trying to think. We're trying to come up with a coherent idea of an evil God that matches, that is symmetrical with the good God hypothesis. And the problem is there isn't one. The one that we came up with, an evil God that gets displeasure and suffers because he causes us suffering, and yet it still wants to keep doing it, doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. That's a completely implausible idea. And so it obviously comes from a problem, which is the way we experience evil, when we do evil things, it's always for a desire for some sort of good. So nobody robs a bank purely because they like doing evil things. Normally it's because they want money, maybe they get some sort of pleasure out of it, or something like that. They get something out of it, some good thing out of it, whether it's pleasure or money or whatever. When you do evil things, it's because you want to experience some sort of good out of it. So a very fundamental understanding of evil does stem from a more primordial desire for something good. So there is what we might call an epistemological priority of the good, which is a very fancy way of saying is we understand what is evil by what is good. We understand the crooked, in this case, by what is straight. What is evil? Well, it is a desire for something good, but usually it comes at the expense of some greater good. That's how we can define it. Now, what is the good is going to be a very more interesting question. And I actually don't think it's possible to define the good, but there's a reason for that.
Well, it's interesting you said nobody does evil just for the sake of evil. But I mean, the classical case with St. Augustine when he was a child was he stole a bunch of pears, not because he was hungry, not because he needed to sell them to get money, but because he wanted to sin for the sake of sin. He wanted to just do evil for the sake of doing evil and to feel that. But I guess your retort would be he wanted to feel the joy, the pleasure of transgression, of crossing some line. And even that assumes that he got something good, something that he enjoyed, some sort of pleasure out of it. And so evil is once again parasitic upon good things, even for its motive for doing it, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, even if you read, so this is a very famous passage in St. Augustine's Confession. St. Augustine's the greatest Christian writer probably in history. And he writes where he and a group of friends.
Ouch! I'm right here. Jeez.
I said Christians, John. I said Christians.
There we go. Good retort.
So a group of him and his friends, when they were young, they stole pears from a tree. And they didn't do it because they were hungry or anything like that. They did it simply because if you read the writing, they got joy out of just doing evil. There's a sort of joy that comes in the fact it's like, I'm not supposed to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? Even in that extreme case, exactly what you pointed out, John, even in his description of it, he's getting some level of joy. And Augustine is one of the greatest defenders of the views that we're talking about here. He thinks that evil is not a thing in itself. It is a lack of a thing. So if there truly was a true evil God, something that is purely, totally evil, it would just not exist. Because to exist is good. To exist is a good thing. It is better to exist than to not exist. Yeah. There is a evil God in that sense because it's just non-existence itself. It ceases to, you can't, that's an incoherent concept.
Well, and for any of our audience listeners who maybe we've gone too fast here, just to kind of back up on what the theory of evil being nothingness is and why it's related to this conversation. I mean, it's the idea that light actually is something, but darkness isn't anything. It's just the absence of light. So when you turn off the lights, you're not bringing darkness into the room. There's not a thing called darkness you can grab with your hand or hold on to. Like light has photons, right? But darkness is just the absence of photons, right? And so the idea there is that pairs onto the moral universe, that evil isn't anything in itself. It's an absence of good things. And so evil, in order to exist, has to sort of leech on to good things and pervert them because it's nothing in itself. And the example I often use is one of the reasons the Nazis were able to be so bad was because they were so good. Like, I can't really imagine anyone but
Clarify
Germans.
what you mean there real quick.
Well, let me clarify. I can't really imagine anyone... So, like, Germany... in the 19th and 20th century, they were the kind of the pinnacle of society. They were advanced technologically, scientifically, philosophically, even just in literature. Germany was kind of seen as the peak of the Enlightenment, right? And so, like, I'm not sure if many other cultures could have pulled off the efficiency required to do something like the Holocaust. The amount of coordination and trains and all of this stuff, like, you had to have a lot of good qualities. You had to be efficient. You had to have thought things through in order to pull that off. And the example I might use is that Hitler, without charisma, without natural gifts and talent, would have just been a crazy conspiracy theorist. It's only because he had such natural gifts that he was able to pervert them so horribly to do such horrible evil. Yeah, I'm not saying the Nazis are secretly good. I'm saying the more skill, passion, and good that you have in you, the more horrific it is when those things get perverted and twisted. Because evil isn't anything in itself. It can only take good things and pervert them. So the more good that's there, the more there is to pervert. I think this is one of the reasons why saints are often so close to the worst of all sinners. Because the more you're developing and growing, the more horrific it is when you turn your gifts loose for evil. That's why Gandalf refuses to take the ring, because he knows that he would take the ring in order to do good, but through him, it would wield a force that could do such evil because there's so much power that he has. He has so much good in him. So,
do you know that Tolkien, in one of his letters, thinks that Gandalf with the ring could have beaten Sauron?
Yeah. And that's... Yeah, but...
Nerd time.
He nerd it out, but like that's the whole point. I mean, Tolkien is totally bought on this idea that evil can't be at the heart of all existence. Evil can't be the absolute. It can't be your god, because evil's nothing. Evil's an absence. That's why orcs aren't an actual species. They're just a perversion of misbred elves, because Iluvatar would never have created orcs.
The god in Tolkien's universe, yeah.
No, stop clarifying things. Just let them get lost in our nerdiness.
No, so you stop going mythological whenever we use Satan, right? Your point is,
we just talk about Satan.
The more good a being is. You know, in traditional Christian theology, it's often taught, this isn't in scripture, at least not directly. You can kind of pick in bits and pieces and construct this. But normally people are taught that Satan was the greatest of angels that God made, or one of the greatest angels. A beautiful, wonderful, awesome, powerful, so much good in Satan. But with that great amount of goodness that God poured forth in creating certain angels, then created the potential for the greatest evil, right? Because there's the most amount of goodness that can then be twisted into evil. It's not a big deal if some powerless thing turns evil. If the mouse crawling underneath my floor right now decides to become an evil mouse, it might be a little annoying, but it's not terrifying.
He's just chewing on your candy bars, like, I'm going to get him.
I mean, he can have them. I'm lactose intolerant. That's a good mouse, you know?
Yeah.
What he meant for evil, God meant for good. So, but if like the, president or prime minister of a nation decides, I'm going to create as much chaos and havoc as possible, that's really, really bad. P.S. I'm not making any political statements here, but that's really, really bad if that were to happen. Why? Because that person wields a good thing, an office of power. The more power is a good thing. God is ultimately powerful and ultimately good. Power is a good thing, but it can be misused. The more good things that you have, the easier it is to create good evils, because there's more there to be twisted and perverted. So this makes sense. Again, this is a traditional Christian teaching. It makes sense of why the most, powerful, wonderful things, most gifted people, if they are not careful, end up twisting it into the worst evils. It's nearly like there's a Marvel movie that has a great saying about this. With great power comes great responsibility.
There we go.
Well,
and some of the worst atrocities...
The downfall of Marvel, right?
Well, and some of the worst atrocities are committed by religious people. People who've spent their whole lives devoting themselves to a cause, growing their talents, their gifts, their passion. And if all of that growth gets directed in the wrong way, I mean, like a mega church pastor,
Oh
right?
yeah.
A lot of power. You have to have a lot of natural gifts. You probably have to be pretty good with people. Like there's a lot of inherently good things there. And once those get weaponized and perverted, it's all the worse for how much good was there. And I think what we're trying to say is, and this is where the term asymmetrical comes in, is the same true in reverse, where evil requires good, but good does not require evil. And I think that's what you would need to say in order to say that somehow God's goodness must be more foundational to all things.
Yeah. And I think it
It's
makes
just-
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it just makes a lot more sense given that we know about evil. We desire evil things. We do evil for the sake of something good, not the
Yeah.
reverse. So it makes so much more sense to say evil is privative. It derives its existence from the good and not the other way around.
Yeah, I like that you said that. There's that, like, even when we do evil as a means to an end, the end we always pursue is good. Maybe not even others' goods, but our good. What we want.
Yeah.
And so good is always implicit in evil, but the reverse isn't true. And it's possible to imagine someone learning a lesson through going through some pain or suffering or evil. Like, evil can be used to bring about the good, but it's also possible for someone to just make the right decisions up front and not need the evil to learn the good lesson. Some people don't need to learn things the hard way because good can just sort of exist in its own right. It doesn't need evil the way evil needs good.
Yeah. And I mean, again, if you think about this, is it better to exist or not to exist? This might be the simplest way of thinking about it. It's better to exist, right? Existence is the very thing that makes all other goods possible. So, to be a purely evil being, which is what the evil God hypothesis typically says, you would need a non-existent God. And non-existent gods don't cause anything. They don't create anything. It's just not a coherent concept. To exist means that you have, in some degree, something good about you, namely that you exist. So a purely evil being can't exist. It can't exist because evil is privation. It is non-existence.
So I guess what you're saying is if being is good, then at some fundamental level, and this gets technical, but being and goodness must overlap. The one who is being itself must also be goodness itself. There's some sort of sense in which those intertwine. I guess, but is that just to presuppose what we're supposed to be proving here? Because I think there's two possible retorts there. The nihilist might just say, no, existence isn't good. Non-existence, death, suicide, like to cease to be, is better. And existence is a pain and suffering that has been placed and thrust upon us against our consent, and I would rather not to have existed. There's people in the nihilist camp who take that tact. But I also think there's a religious retort, though, which is a lot of religious groups are actually saying that all things that exist are suffering, that existence is suffering. And as soon as you have anything or hold on to anything, that is suffering. And to cease to be, to cease holding on to things that are, and to just let go and enter nothingness, that is salvation and enlightenment. So would they just reject the premise that being is goodness and that to exist is inherently good?
Yeah.
And in that way, do they just sort of escape the whole framework for what we're talking about?
Yeah, so normally, there's two very different things going on there. One's a sort of pessimistic, nihilistic view of, which is interesting that you'd have a conversation with them, because obviously they think that conversation is good enough to exist to have. So I can point out the inconsistencies of that. But also I just think that just strikes us as odd, that existence itself I think there's a general consensus that existence itself has a lot of suffering. But we can all, at least at the very least, imagine that existence itself isn't a bad thing, because because if you were to ask that person, name all the good things in the world, as soon as you name one good thing, in order to experience it, you have to exist first, right? So the existence has to be the good that precedes all other goods. It would just be to deny that there are any goods whatsoever. And I just don't think that that's a very plausible view that many people accept. I think the religious one, which it seems like you're appealing to Buddhism, is far more interesting.
I didn't want to limit it because I know Buddhism's so diverse. But yeah, groups of Buddhism would say existence is suffering. In order to get out of the cycle of suffering, you need to cease to exist, or at least accept that there is no permanent self, and that's
Yeah.
into yeah.
Buddhists don't normally say that existence is suffering. What they typically say is desire. And sometimes it's translated selfish desire is suffering. It's not that existence itself is bad, or that existence itself is something to be done away with. What's usually what they want to do away with is the perception of an independent self. Buddhists typically deny the idea that you exist as an independent self, like a sort of isolated individual cut off from the rest of reality. They think that's an illusion, and it's something to be transcended. So the goal isn't to get beyond existence, it's to get beyond the illusion. It's actually to join in and perceive reality correctly. So I actually
The more deeper existence.
Yeah, more the real way of the world, right? Which is why you get some of these, and especially in Zen Buddhism, you get a lot of these paradoxical things, like what's the sound of one hand clapping? Or if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. I've heard that attributed to Zen Buddhism. But basically, it's this idea of trying to transcend the logic that slices up and cuts up reality into different things. Buddhists try to get you beyond that to see the real nature of reality, which is all an interconnected whole. And that's why the goal is nirvana, which you can reach states of nirvana in this life. And that's a good thing. So if the goal was non-existence, then what's nirvana? Right? See, so clearly, I don't think Buddhism teaches or denies the idea that existence is good. It just denies that our perception, our false consciousness of existence is good.
Well, I would say three things in response. The first one would be, Buddhism's so diverse that I didn't want to actually use the word, because I know most Buddhists would say this isn't nothingness. But I also think there are some within, like, I think Buddhism's diverse enough, and I also think there are some movements that would take the tact that I was taking, which is to say being just doesn't equal goodness. But I think you're right, though, that the overall thrust of a lot of Buddhism is misconstrued as that, rather than helpfully seen as that. So I think that's a good clarification. The second thing I would say, see, I wanted the absence of my words to be the presence of something, because that's the whole point.
Very deep, John. Very deep.
The second thing I would say is, okay, even if a lot of these religious movements don't say it's the negation of existence itself, but merely your false perception of it as the body or your personality or these other things, that would still cut against a lot of the power and potency and persuasiveness of what you were saying, because you were trying to say that, well, how can you say that existence isn't good? Because, even to articulate that is to do it using terms that exist, to use your words, to gesticulate with your body, and these types of things. But those are precisely the types of things that I think a lot of Buddhists would say aren't real, those experiences. And so there might be a deeper existence, but in framing the types of arguments you made, you didn't appeal to a deeper existence. You appealed more to the phenomenological experiential existence, this sense that we all have that, hey, being alive is good, eating is good, seeing your wife is good. And those are also the types of things that I think a lot of Buddhists would critique. And so even if it doesn't negate the idea that being is goodness, it does critique a lot of the force or oomph or experiential power of the type of case you're making, which is just, hey, empirically, go out, and existing is better than not existing, people. It's nice to be alive.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would say, the fundamentally, Buddhists can't deny that good is primary.
Yeah, I'm not saying they do.
Yeah, and so even though they might arrive at it from a different way than the way I framed here, they get to the same conclusion. Because I think that there are many routes to the same location, and the way Buddhists take is a route to coming to that conclusion. Even the fourfold path that the Buddha taught, it ends up at the idea of removing illusion so that you can see reality correctly, which is a good thing. It's fundamentally a good thing. It's meant to, the removal of desire from your life how do you get that? Well, you have to desire to remove the desire in your life, which means you're desiring a good thing for, and I don't want to say yourself because there's the denial, anatta is what it's called, this denial that there is a sort of independent self, but it nevertheless is a desire, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're kind of agreeing. We're coming at it from different ways, but you're saying they are too. So, I think the final thing I'd say is I do know some people who almost fantasize about non-being. And I don't know if it's inherently suicidal or not, because I don't think they're having thoughts about actually killing themselves, but like I do know some people who see non-being almost as a blessing. And
so birth is a curse.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who do actually think that. There was someone in England who sued their parents because they didn't consent to be born. And I think I think there's a lot of people who are very tired of life. If you have disease, if you have sickness or pain or mental illness, like non-being seems like a blessing. And I wonder, though, I think your response would just be what you're probably picturing there isn't non-being. It's sleep or rest.
It's a really good nap.
You're picturing something that actually still derives from the world of beings. And this is once again why the good is parasitic. The bad is parasitic upon the good. Because even in trying to talk about non-being and ceasing to be, you're using things that are. Being always reasserts itself. You can't even conceive of nothingness. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Yeah, this goes back before Plato. I think Parmenides talked about to even think of nothing, what you're doing is you're taking a thing that's there and saying it's not there. It begins with the assumption of what is there, and you begin to subtract. And that's the only way to make sense of nothing. There's a great joke that nothing backwards is good, which also means nothing. Which also means nothing, yeah. Yeah. So it's the point is that nothing, it's not a concept that you're actually imagining. You can't imagine it any more than you can imagine getting duck, it has no content there.
It sounds like a real German word. It
does,
sounds like a real Gegingluck.
Yeah, I mean, I actually I'm not trying to pronounce it correctly, so someone in the comments is going to rip me for that. All that to say is, if for people who actually do that, the correct answer I don't think is philosophy. The correct answer is nearly pastoral. If their existence has become so terrible that they would rather cease to exist, then the correct answer to that person, it's like trying to, there's certain people you want to reason with, but there's other people that you just want to say, the goal here isn't reason, you don't need reason here. You need to experience the goodness of life again.
Yeah.
So I think very clearly those people, someone who sues their parents for bringing them into existence, you got to feel for that person.
Well, I think what we're coming around to is that the usual kind of attributes of God as being itself, goodness itself, truth itself, beauty, pleasure, desire itself, is we've gone through those almost one by one, and we've said being is better than non-being. And non-being is parasitic upon being. You can't even articulate non-being without using things that exist and appealing to things like sleep, which isn't non-existence. And we've also said, well, truth is more foundational than falsity. And even to state what is false, you have to use things that are true about the illusion, right? Like, even to say I'm having an illusion is to presuppose truth. And so you can imagine truth without falsity, but the reverse doesn't hold. Then we've gone and said the same thing for goodness, right? Like goodness, like light, actually is something. But badness, like darkness, is merely the absence of light. It's nothing in itself. And then we finally said that God as the beautiful, as the object of ultimate desire, to which all, Go ahead. I was about to summarize it perfectly, Seth. You cut me off.
Do it. Just go.
No, but
forget me.
That's beauty, bliss, pleasure, deriving joy from things is somehow more fundamental than ugliness and destroying things. Because even when you're wanting to destroy something beautiful, you're getting a little bit of pleasure out of it. And so pleasure, bliss, beauty are implicit even in ugliness and trying to destroy things. And so I think what we're ultimately saying is that being, goodness, truth, and beauty are more foundational than non-being, ugliness, falsity, and badness. And so at the heart of all things, there must be one who is being, truth, goodness, and beauty itself, and not one who is ugliness, evil, and lies itself.
Wow, that's very hippie of you.
Hippity-doo. What were you going to say before you interrupted me?
None of this rules out the partially evil, malevolent middle schooler simulator.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And that might even be Seth. What if you and I are the creators of this universe? And
I am the
everyone's
incarnation of my own simulation. That would be quite interesting, right?
And now, does that mean I get to crucify you?
Good luck. Good luck. It's not. I wrote it out of the program. I actually wrote myself in as immortal. You'll see that eventually.
I think we nailed it.
Yep.